All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. Hopefully, everybody can hear me. Hopefully, you can see my screen where I've got the Futato exercises pulled up. These weekly video conferences, primarily, what we want to do with these is give you an opportunity to kind of one on one get some feedback. So, if there are concepts that we're going over that are foggy for you, any questions you have, maybe you were working on your homework and there was an exercise you came to and you couldn't really understand why you were getting it wrong, anything like that. We want to discuss this where you can kind of get that immediate feedback. So it's a lot easier for me to illustrate things through a video conference as well. So we'll try to do these each week. Usually I'll try to do them Tuesday. Some weeks we may have to push to Thursday, but I'll try to do them earlier in the week where the material that we're covering is a little bit more fresh. So what I'll do here in this conference is we'll go over last week's Futato exercises and I'll kind of discuss them. I will also go over any questions that I've been sent to people who have specific requests that I cover these. Obviously, if you're not here in the conference right now live, you'll be able to watch it later on. And then finally, I may spend a little bit of time kind of going over the current week's material, just sort of supplementing that a little bit. And as we continue through the semester, more and more, I hope to bring in some of the actual Hebrew text of the Bible. So, for example, Genesis 1, Genesis 12, those are some places where it's kind of helpful to see what you're learning in action, so to speak. It's a little helpful to kind of look at the text and look for the concepts that you're learning about, see those pop up in the actual text of the Hebrew Bible. So I'll try to incorporate that more and more as we go forward. At this point, we've basically learned the alphabet and a few vocabulary words, so there's not a ton that we can really look at in the text because you just don't really know enough right now. But what we can do is maybe pull up Genesis 1 toward the end and just look at the letters and try to sound out different words, that sort of a thing. So I'll jump in here, get started with the Futato exercises from last week. And what I'm going to do is, you've got the answer key for these in the back of your book. If you go to the answers to practice drills, he will give you, let's see, we're in lesson 2 here, and we're looking at D and G. So he's got all the answers that he anticipates you providing back here. So feel free, honestly, I encourage you, once you complete the exercises, check yourself, check the answer key and see what you got right, try to figure out why you may have missed something. I'll say, additionally, one of the purposes of the peer review exercise, which, by the way, don't forget to complete that by 11:59 p.m. Central Time this week on Wednesday. Those are due every Wednesday for the previous week's lessons. Sunday, you will be assigned a peer review if you complete your peer review on time. Those will go out at midnight Sunday morning. I guess that's the midnight between Saturday and Sunday. So if you do not submit your Futato exercises on time, when those peer reviews get assigned, you won't be in the pool because your exercises aren't submitted yet, and so you won't be assigned a peer review. You won't be counted off for not doing a peer review if you're not assigned one. If you turn in your Futato exercises late, there will be a penalty for that late submission. But if you submitted your exercises on time and you fail to complete the peer review by Wednesday, 11:59 p.m., then you will receive a 50% penalty on your Futato exercises for the week that you're reviewing. So this week we're reviewing Unit 1 Futato exercises. If you do not complete that peer review by the end of the day, Wednesday, 11:59 p.m. Central Time, your Futato exercises for week 1 will receive a 50% penalty as a result. So Be aware of that. If you have any trouble accessing those peer reviews, let me know. I'm trying to get that worked out for a couple students, but most people seem to have accessed those. So, like I said, Futato gives you the answer key. So when I'm going through these exercises, I'm going to focus on things that I think are important to know or things that might be a little bit tricky, as opposed to just reading off what he's already given you. So let's go up here and take a look at practice for lesson 2. We were assigned exercises D and G. And let me just make sure D 1 through 10, G 1 through 30. All right, so let's take a look here. D 1 through 10. All right, so most of these are pretty straightforward. The difference here between number 1 and number 2 is the dagesh in the bait. That changes the pronunciation from bet to vet. So you get that V sound when the bait is missing its dagesh. And if you want to refer to this dagesh-less bait as a vait, that's fine with me. Most people will still refer to it as a bait, but if it helps you remember, I don't mind you referring to this as a vait and this as a bait. All right, this next one here, 3 and 4, again, we're looking at the pay with and without the dagesh. So with the dagesh, it's the p sound as in pole, and without the dagesh, it's the f sound as in full. Now, I put a note here, depending on you can pronounce this a couple different ways. If you want to emphasize the length of the shirt, this is a long vowel, then you might say pool instead of pole. Pole is really not a long vowel in English, and so I'm not sure which Futato gives here, but some people would pronounce this pole and some would pronounce it pool. Just make sure that you're getting close to, make sure it's the right type of vowel. You need to have some sort of an u sort of vowel here. And obviously you need the P sound at the beginning and the L sound at the end. Here the only difference in pronunciation should be that initial sound, so it goes from P to F. So if you put pool for number 3, it should be fool for number 4. All right, 5 and 6, we've got the same beginning letter. What happens here, the difference, and this is really a bad example because you're never going to have this weak dagesh. You're never going to have this, I don't think, at the end of a word. And so this is just a bad example. But if you're wondering what is the difference between the cough with the dagesh and the cough without, it's basically the difference between back with a normal English K sound and this sound that's very similar to the chet in Hebrew. So this sound that we make, this, it's somewhere between a K and an H. So H, we would say K, we would say k, k. The chet is more of it's what we call a fricative. It's not an actual stop. So the K, you can't just make a K sound go on and on and on and on and on. It's a stop. It's k, 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 k. But if you made that sound continue on, made it flow continuously, like an H sound does, if you make that sound continue on with the K sound, you get something like I know that sounds horrible, but that's what you're going for. The continuousness of a K sound would be all right. Now, when you pronounce this K sound, this would be the same as a cough without the dagesh or a chet. A chet will also have this sound. If it helps you to get a little vibration in there, a little spittle in it, instead of you want to go with or something like that, Honestly, do whatever's easiest for you. If you want to say chet instead of chet, you can. But as long as you get somewhere between, you don't want it to sound like an English K. All right, that's what the cough with the doggish is. All right, that's the English K, bach, back, depending on how you pronounce this. I pronounce the patak as the a as in back, but some pronounce it as the a as in father, and so that's why I have bach here as an option. So the difference between 5 and 6, 5 would be back, and 6 would be bach, bach. Or you could say 5 is bach, and 6 is bach. So you can hear, hopefully, the difference in the sound there. All right. So that's 5 and 6. Moving on, looking at 7 and 8, the difference here. I see Mo has joined. Mo, I don't know if you have a microphone or a way of speaking, but if you do have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time, or you can type them into the chat if you're unable to use a microphone. But I want to make sure you get an opportunity to ask any questions. We can go over those in this video conference. All right, so going back here to the exercise number 7 and number 8, the difference again is just the between the two is the doggish and the bait. So we've got bass for number 7 versus vase for number 8. Remember that sere is that a sound. So maybe like if you've had Spanish before, it's the sound of an E in Spanish. In English, this would be like survey, V-E-Y at the end of survey. That's that long E sound. All right. But again, the somic, just a normal S sound. Pretty straightforward there. All right. And then number 9 and number 10, very similar to number 7 and number 8, but we've shifted the bait to a pay. And so with the doggish, we have pace. Without the doggish, we have face. All right, so this is probably a pretty frustrating exercise for you guys, especially G here. This is basically the same thing, but how is it different? What is the difference between D and G? I guess the difference is, I don't know, I mean, they're pretty much the same. So I'm not sure what the difference is between the two, but you get more practice here in G. One reason why this is so frustrating is different English speakers in different locations are going to pronounce the same English word differently. So that means you're going to probably, you know, for example, here, egg. Well, in the Midwest, a lot of people say egg. So it would be like a sere G, egg. Well, that's not how people in maybe the East Coast would say. You know, they would say egg rather than egg. So just go with it. The, you know, other exercises won't be as frustrating, but just try as best as you can to kind of give an English word that approximates the sound that the Hebrew letters are making. So number 1, you've got a gimel, that's going to be g. You've got a sere, that's going to be a. You've got a mem, that's going to be Put them all together, game is what you get. All right, so all the way through here, rain. And maybe it's helpful because you don't get this from the answer key. I'll just go through and pronounce these how they should be pronounced if you saw them in Hebrew. Forget about the English word or whatever. I'm just going to pronounce them because the key here, the point, is for you to understand Hebrew pronunciation. So like I said, I'll just read through these and you can hear how they should be pronounced. So number 1 is game. Number 2, rain. Rain. Now in Hebrew, that resh, that's not the same type of R sound as what English uses. English uses what's called, I think it's called a palatal fricative, something like that. Basically, what we do to make our R sound in English is something different than most languages. We actually, and just practice saying row. The more you think about it, the weirder it'll feel. But when you say row, you don't realize it, but you're actually pulling your tongue back into your mouth. You're kind of bunching it up against the top back of your mouth. You're kind of pulling it toward the back. Most R's in other languages involve some sort of a tap against the top of the mouth. It's just a tap. Well, ours isn't a tap. Ours is it's what's called a liquid. It just kind of flows. So if you pronounce a Hebrew R sound, that resh, if you pronounce that as an English R, no problem. It's not, it's not going to cause you an issue. So if you just call this rain, that's fine. Don't worry about it. But again, in Hebrew, the resh is pronounced more like the closest similarities that we would have to English, even like a Spanish alveolar tap. So if you think of the Spanish word, I'm trying to think of a very common Spanish word that has an R in it. Let's see here. Cara. Well, that's probably not. I'm thinking cara, para, something like that. Your tongue kind of taps that ridge behind your teeth. It's just a tap. That's closer to the Hebrew R, but the Hebrew R is a little bit more like it's almost like a roll. It's not quite like the trilled R in Spanish, but it's closer to that European sort of style R. So that's something you can just keep in mind as if you want to practice it, if you want to get a little bit closer to the pronunciation, that's what it's going to sound like. So here I would say this as rain. And it's going to sound a little bit like a D because we also tap our D's on that alveolar ridge in English a lot of times. So rain is how I would pronounce this one. Just a little bit of a deep dive on the Hebrew R and how it's different from the English R. Number 3, I would just say bull. This Hatef Patach here. Most of the Hatef vowels are pronounced just like a Shava, which is, even in English, we call it a schwa in English, but it's basically like the first A in banana. I mean, you almost don't even pronounce it. You just slide from the B to the N, banana. It's that real quick sound. So I would just say bull here. You almost don't even pronounce it. All right. That's not the same as a silent Shava where you actually do not pronounce it, but it's close. It's just barely a breath of a vowel there. Bull. All right. Number 4. This is a sin, not a shin. If you want to kind of have a little clue to how to keep these straight, the line that my teacher gave me, sin is never right. Sin is never right. So, if you see the dot on the right, it's not a sin. All right? Sin is never right. Sin has the dot on the left. Okay, so, and you can also think of it as, old folklore or wives' tales or whatever, that the left hand is the evil hand, something like that. You can think of the dot on the left marking the sin character. Shin is the one that has the dot on the right. So here we have safe. Number 5 is just key. The hirik and the yod go together. You don't even have to pronounce a Y sound. This isn't key, it's key. All right. Number 6 here, note. The way Futato uses pronunciation and modern Hebrew do not distinguish between the tav with and without the dagesh. Some grammars do, but here we don't. If you did make that distinction, it would be noth, like oath, like you take an oath with with an N sound at the front of it. But Futato in modern Hebrew, they just say note. All right, number 7, sane. Again, we've got the dot on the left, so this is a sin, and we get sane. Number 8, we've got hen, like the wife of a rooster, maybe. A hen is the hey, segel, noon. All right, number 9, I mentioned before, egg. Egg. This is that short E sound, as in bet. Number 10, here we have the dot on the right, so this is a shin. This would be she. Number 11, ro, 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 or you can just say ro. Number 12, the vav can get a little bit tricky. It can be sometimes confusing. Is the vav functioning as a vowel or is it functioning as a consonant? Well, the easy way to tell is ask yourself, does the vav have its own vowel? And if it does, well, then it's a consonant. So here, the vav, where is the vowel for the vav? Well, it would be the whole vav next to it. So this first vav is a consonant. Something that will help you is a vowel. There's only one time when a vowel is ever going to begin a word. So every word in Hebrew is going to begin with a consonant, except for one. We'll learn about that later. But if you see a vav at the beginning of the word, it's almost certainly going to be a consonant of the sound. There's only one exception to that. So here we've got v-o-t, vote. Number 13, zu, zu. 14, ya. Here for the kibbutz, I use that as in up. That shorter U sound, so I say ya. I think Futato probably just pronounces it like the Shurik, so he'd probably say you here. But for me, it's helpful pedagogically, as far as like learning the language goes, to have a different sound for each vowel to kind of help keep them separate. Okay, number 15. Again, this is a hatef kametz. So again, it's just going to sound like a vocal schwa, which again is to say very, very short. I'm trying to think of a word where we have a schwa sound in English that's represented by an O. I use banana for the A sound. I use metallic for the E sound. Metallic, you can see how short that is. For the O sound, is there an English word with a schwa represented by an O? Probably connect. The word connect. We don't usually say connect or connect. We say connect. So that would be, it's basically just nud. Nud. So nod even probably is not short enough. If this were a kametz chatuf, we could say nod. But with this being reduced, it's probably just better to say nud. All right, number 16, we've got bake. Now, just a note on the difference between a kaf with a dagesh and a kof, because both of these are going to sound like K's to most English speakers. There is technically a difference in the pronunciation between the kof and the kaf. Most English speakers won't pick up on the difference. They won't hear it. Because we don't distinguish between the Q sound and the K sound in English. But in Hebrew, and you can see this in Arabic, if you know any Arabic or if you've heard Arabic before, the Q sound is a little bit farther down in the throat. So k, bake, That's pretty high up in the back of the throat. Bake. A lot of people will illustrate the sound of the kof in the word crow. Crow. Now, you may just say crow where it's at the same place as a K, but sometimes people will articulate the k as in crow a little bit lower in the throat. Does it really sound different? Probably not to most people. The point is, it is articulated in a different spot. If you just use the same sound for the kof and the cough with the dogish, you're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. But for the language nerds who want to know the differences, that's the difference. All right, so bake and cake. All right, so here, cake, you think, well, those are the same sound. Cake, cake. If you wanted to really articulate that kof, it would be just, again, a little bit lower in your throat. Cake. So kind of try to push the down into your throat, and that's a little bit closer versus that's the difference in the sound. All right, number 18, Futato probably just pronounces the Hirik the same as the Hirik Yod, so he would say it's C, but I pronounce the Hirik as an I. So si is what I would say here. Now, that's not an English word, but that's how I pronounce it, si. All right, number 19, same thing. You've got a samic and a sin, so they make the same sound. Here you've got a Hirik in 18. Here you've got a Hirik Yod in 19. So I go from si to C. Number 20, I would pronounce this as oats. All right, oats. Again, the ayin is basically in English, there's no sound really. There, technically, I guess that is a sound. Well, there's not a word that makes this sound. There is a sound like this in English, but it's not a word. And so for English speakers, it's easier just to make it silent. I'll talk a little bit because I got a question about this, about the difference between the ayin and the aleph. They do sound different in Hebrew. Again, the sound is hard to pick up at all in English, so English speakers certainly are going to have a hard time differentiating between the two, but they do technically have different sounds in Hebrew. So let's come back to that when I get down to the aleph. All right, so here I'm just going to say oats as if this were silent. Number 21, the vav here, v, segel, tav, t, vet. All right, number 22, lean. Number 23, aim. All right, so what's the difference between the aleph and the ayin if they're both silent? And if they're both silent, why even have them? What's the point? Well, here's the first reason. Even if they were silent in Hebrew, the reason to have them is because these vowels need a consonant. In English, a vowel doesn't need a consonant. A vowel can stand on its own. In Hebrew, a vowel has to hang off of a consonant. There's only one exception to that. Like I said, we'll get to that eventually. But anytime you have a vowel in Hebrew, you are almost always, it's going to be preceded by a consonantal sound. All right, and this technically can help us see what the value of these are. If you say, I am a student, the word a, the very beginning of that sound, that little push that you have to get out to make the a sound. That is the sound of the aleph. Okay, now it almost doesn't even make sense. Let me give you a word where you can hear it better. All right, think of this. Uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. Here you can hear it at the end of the syllable. uh-oh. You actually, now you might just say, oh. No, actually you don't. You don't say, oh, oh. Maybe my 2-year-old says, oh. But when you say it, you say, uh-oh. You put a pause in there. That will stop. That's called a glottal stop. That's where your glottis stops again. I can't remember what part of your throat anatomy it stops against. You have something called a glottis in your throat, and that hits a wall and makes that breaks the airflow. So that's when you hear uh-oh, you hear that stop in the sound. That's your glottis causing that stop. All right? That's the sound of the aleph. The aleph is basically a glottal stop. Uh-oh, uh-oh. So that is how to think of it. If you go around trying to pronounce the aleph in these words, trying to force an articulation of it, force a pronunciation of it, you're going to sound funny, okay? So for all practical purposes, you can treat it as silent. One place where you may want to bring in the pronunciation of the aleph is when the aleph occurs between two vowels. So for example, let's take the word, let's just go first one off the top of my head here. Let's take the word Yisrael, Israel, okay? Yisrael, all right? Yisrael, there you can put the stop of the aleph between the ah and the a. Now if you say Yisrael, that's fine, but you can hear how it sounds a little bit closer to say Yisrael. That stop there is the aleph. All right, so does it make a sound or does it stop a sound? Your pick. Same thing for, like a, what would be another example? Like a K sound. Well, the only reason you can hear the k sound at all is because you're forcing air through the stop where you put your tongue in the top of your throat. It's only because of that air, it's only because of that vowel that you can actually hear the k sound. So in Israel, the only reason you can hear the aleph is because you stop hearing the vowel sounds. If you just blend these vowels together, Yisrael, you just blend them, well, then you wouldn't hear it. But if you say Yisrael, well, now you can hear the stop. You can hear that pause there. All right? So that is the value of the aleph when you want to talk about pronunciation. It's that pause that you hear in uh-oh. All right? So what about the ayin? Okay, well, the ayin is a little bit different. The ayin is kind of like, imagine I have a 5-year-old daughter, and she likes to help her mom cook. She likes to chop up veggies and stuff like that. She's never tried to cook anything on her own, but I can imagine if she did, without a recipe, she just tries combining things together. Maybe she tries to make me breakfast someday or something like that. She doesn't really know what she's doing without guidance. So let's say she wants to make me a bowl of cereal. She grabs some milk and maybe some raisins, and puts some mustard in there, and just puts a bunch of things together. So maybe like, here's your cereal, Dad. I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to make a particular sound, because I'm a very insensitive father. I'm going to look at that bowl, and I'm going to go, ugh. All right, so the very first sound that you hear in the disgusted reaction that is, ugh, 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 ugh. My wife's here with me listening to this. We're working together in our home office, and so she gets to hear all these sounds. But That sound that you make, ooh, that's the sound of the ion. So if you really wanted to force the articulation here in number 24, you could say aim, aim. Okay? It's kind of this, it's not quite a dry heave, but it's sort of a ooh. All right? I hope that you can at least hear it. The only reason why I'm taking the time to sound so ridiculous is because when I was learning Hebrew, this really threw me. I didn't understand if they're silent, I don't like what's the purpose, and if they're both silent, why have two of them? There is actually a difference between them, okay? So English speakers are not well practiced in making these sounds, so we sound pretty ridiculous when we try to make them. So you don't have to try. You know, you're not going to be speaking Hebrew, to someone. So you don't really need to be too worried about how you sound. But there is a lot of vocabulary where the only difference between two words is one has an aleph, one has an ayin. In that case, it may be helpful to have sort of a different way of articulating those sounds so that you can keep them straight. So, all that to say, pronunciation is helpful because if you learn pronunciation well, it will really help with vocabulary and reading and all of these sorts of things. But understand, you're not learning how to speak Hebrew, you're learning how to read Hebrew. And while traditionally reading Hebrew has involved speaking Hebrew, because, for centuries you didn't read silently, you read out loud, you're not composing Hebrew in this class. You're simply seeing Hebrew that's already composed and reading it or saying it. So your pronunciation, there are limits to how important it is. It is helpful, but that's why most textbooks just call these letters silent, because what are you going to do with them? I mean, if you really try to force this sort of pronunciation, you're probably putting more effort into it than is helpful. Right? So, enough said. Just wanted to explain the difference here between the ayin and the aleph. All right, so that takes us to number 25, which would just be soul. This is a sen, so we have soul. Number 26 would be need. 27, near. 28, roof. 29, gate, and 30 would be cots. Now, Futato probably has this as coats. I guess not. I mean, this would have to... He's saying these aren't Hebrew words. If this were a Hebrew word, this would have to be a kametz, because the kametz chatuf can only appear in an unaccented syllable, and if you only have one syllable, it's accented. So this has to be the kametz chatuf. So kots would be the way to pronounce this. That's it. All right, so I do want to go over a couple extra questions that I had from, let me see here, a couple other questions that I got in email that I haven't covered yet. I covered the aleph and the ayin, what's the purpose if they're silent, and what the difference between them actually is. The differences between pronunciation. Okay, so I want you to keep separate in your mind the Begad Kafat letters and the letters that have a final form. There is some overlap there. For example, Kaf and Pei are both Begad Kafat and final. They both have final forms. Generally speaking, when you see a final form, it's going to be the... I'm trying to make sure there aren't any... Generally speaking, when you see a final form, and it happens to be a Begad Kafat letter, it's going to be the Dagish Lis pronunciation, that softer pronunciation. So, for example, whenever you see, move my mouse back over here, whenever you see the final pay, it's not going to have a dogish. The dogish usually only occurs, it's not going to occur at the end of a word. Let's just say that. There are a few rare exceptions to that, but generally speaking, when you see a final form, it's not going to have a dogish in it. That means that generally speaking, if the letter with a final form is a Begad Kafat letter, it's usually going to be the dogish sound. It's going to be the softer sound. Let me think of, yeah. The exceptions to that are so few that that's pretty reliable. All right, so when you have a pay with a final form, here's really the thing that, I mean, if it has a dogish somehow, even if it has, the pronunciation of this does not depend on whether the form is final or not. The pronunciation really comes down to the dogish. So if it doesn't have a dogish, it's going to be the F sound. If it does have it, it's going to be the P sound. The same with the cough. Let's see if we get a final cough here. No final cough. Of course, you've got final mem, but mem only has one sound. Final noon only has one sound. It's really just the pay and the cough. And actually, I'm trying to think if let's see here. Okay, so I want to make sure that Futato does distinguish between these two. So anytime you lack the dogish, it's going to be the softer sound. For the letters that have two forms, that's going to be the cough and the pay. Those are the only ones that have a final form that are the Gakufat that could have two different pronunciations. So, generally speaking, you're not going to have a dogish in the final form, so it's usually going to be the pronunciation there. All right. How do you tell the difference between the final form of the noon and the final form of the cough? It really has to do with the fact that the difference between the basic forms of the two. The noon is a notch with a short foot. The cough is a well-rounded three-sided. I mean, the difference here is the length of the roof and the foot, the top and the bottom. Okay, so the final cough has a much longer roof, much longer top. The noon has just sort of a marker, and then you've got a line straight down. Actually, more confusing than the final form of the cough in the noon would be the vav in the noon. The vav and the noon look very similar. The difference is the final noon is going to extend below the rest of the text. So let's take a look at, well, here you go. He actually doesn't compare the vav and the final noon. Let's go back to our practice now. So you see how the final noon, that goes lower than the resh, all right? The pay goes lower than the sin, okay? So these final forms that drop low, they're going to actually extend below the baseline. So a vav, let's see if we can find a vav here. Yeah. The vav ends at the baseline. It ends where the rest of the letters end. So that's how you tell the difference between a vav and a final noon. The final noon is actually going to drop lower. All right? couple other things, the Vav and the Zayin. The Vav doesn't actually go through the vertical, okay? So you have a notch and you come straight down. The Zayin goes beyond the vertical, so you have a notch, you come back in the middle and come down. So this notch goes on both sides of the vertical for the Zayin. It's only on the left side of the vertical for the Vav, right? Let's see if there's anything else that would be good to cover. Again, the difference between the Tav and the Chet and Hey is going to be the little foot at the bottom. That's the difference between the Tav and the Chet. The difference between the Chet and the Hey is going to be the gap here. So be careful when you're writing to leave room for that. Samik is going to be more rounded than the final Mem. Final Mem is more square. The Sade versus the Aleph has to do with the fact that the Sade, this arm, connects, let's just say the base goes beyond this first arm. Here it's a smooth edge. Here you've got a ridge, okay? So that's the difference between the Sade and the Ayin. Now you could say that the Ayin comes below the baseline, where the Sade rests on the baseline. The problem is once you put a vowel under this Ayin, that little, this becomes a lot more flat, okay, to make room for the vowel. All right, again, the Resh and the Dalet, the difference here is going to be a curve versus a notch. The difference between the Kaf and the Beit is the bottom is curved rather than notched on the Kaf. Right? So hopefully, excuse me, hopefully that makes sense to you. Let's finish up by going through this week's. Let me just go through here and point out anything important that may get confusing. This right here, short and silent, where short is silent, short means silent, short indicate. If you can associate short and silent together, this is going to be very important for distinguishing between a silent and a vocal Shabbat. Now, that means you got to know your short vowels, okay? So while Futato uses some different terminology for the length of vowels, everybody agrees that the vowels that he calls short are short, okay? So short is the terminology that you can stick with here. Short is patach, segel, hirik, kibbutz. Those are going to be your short, and kametz hatuf. Those are going to be your short vowels. So anytime you have a shavah in a letter followed by a letter that has one of those short vowels, that's going to be silent. Midbar, yaktil. Okay? If the vowel before the shavah is not short, if it's anything else, then that is probably a vocal shavah. All right. If the shavah is underneath the first consonant of a word, well, is it preceded by a short vowel? Nope, it's preceded by nothing. So, hang on. Yeah, so that means it's vocal, okay? It's not preceded by a short vowel. If there are two shavahs in a row within a word, then the first one will be silent, the second one will be vocal. Okay? Now there is one situation where you actually get two of them together at the end of a word, in which case they're both silent. That's a particular verb form, but you don't need to worry about that at this point. All right? How do you know whether a dagesh is strong or weak? Well, what sound immediately precedes the letter that has the dagesh? So here in midbar, what is the sound that precedes the bait holding the dagesh? Midbar. What's a d sound? It's a consonantal sound. That means this is a weak dagesh. only when the sound immediately preceding the letter with the dogish is a vowel is it going to be a dogish forte, a strong dogish. So here, kidash, kidash. What is the sound immediately before the dalet holding the dogish? Kidash. It's E, a vowel sound. That's what tells you that this is a strong dogish. So when the letter with the dogish is preceded by a vowel sound, the dogish is strong. When the letter is holding the dogish is preceded by a consonant sound, the dogish is weak. All right. Now, if you're following his recommendation here, that keep tail is actually two tets, and you would write it out in English as TT, and you ask what sound precedes the dogish, well, you'd split that here and you'd say, well, it's the T sound. Remember, it's what sound precedes the letter holding the dogish. So what comes before the first T is what you're asking here. Here, it's an I. It's this I. Kit tail. Right? So it's still a vowel sound. This first tet doesn't come before the dogish. It's with the dogish. So that does not count as a consonant sound, making this, you know, first of all, that this is not a weak dogish, because only the Begad Kafat letters are going to have a weak dogish. All right. So anyways, what else do we need to look at here? I guess that's it for syllables. Let's look at nouns. All right. Again, read all of this carefully. Please do not skip through here. Futato is so condensed that if you miss something he says, you've missed something important. He cuts out a lot of the less important material. That said, these little boxes here are going to summarize the indispensable information. Like, I don't know how else to... I don't want to dismiss all the rest of this, but these forms are going to be the primary noun forms you need to be aware of. So masculine singular nouns will usually lack any sort of vocalic suffix. They're not going to have a real ending. Feminine singular will usually have a comets hey ending. And I guess... Oh, here we go. Okay. Masculine plural will have a heric yod mem ending. Feminine plural will usually have... Where's the feminine plural? He doesn't have a box for the feminine plural. Okay, well, it's right here. This Holam Vav Tav. So those four endings. Masculine singular, nothing. Feminine singular, comets hey. Masculine plural, heric yod mem. Feminine plural, Holam Vav Tav. Those four endings, you have got to have those memorized, all right? And it's also helpful to memorize the dual form, which is basically the patak, yod, heric, mem. Right? And here, this chart right here, this is what you gotta know this one backwards and forwards. You gotta have this memorized, okay? That said, read all the information here. It's very important. All right, we'll leave it there. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to send them to me. Hopefully your week's off to a good start. Do not forget to do your Futato, your peer review for Unit 1's Futato. If you have trouble accessing that, let me know. But it should be located, if nothing else, when you go to the home screen. So let me go ahead and just walk you through this real quick. I'm going to pull up, let's see here. Let's go into Canvas. I'm going to pull up our class. I'm going to go into student view. But you can already see over here I've got my to-do list. If you have not completed your peer review, it should be popping up over here. So as a test student, the test student wasn't assigned a peer review, so it doesn't appear, but everything that I haven't done yet that's assigned should be over here somewhere. So hopefully you can find that. Now, as an instructor, I'm able to, I want to be careful how I do this because I don't want to necessarily show you anything I shouldn't. Just move this over here, I guess. Now, there's not going to be a good way for me to do it. I'm going to leave student view. I have another way of seeing who the reviews are assigned to, and I can see whether or not you've completed it, but I'm accessing it through an option that you don't have. So hopefully your peer review shows up over here in your to-do. But if not, let me know. We'll try to get that figured out. All right. So with that, I'll leave it. Send me any questions you have. Have a great week. Thanks, guys.